Welcome to Children's Church here at Monthalia United Methodist Church. We sure have been missing getting to be together here at the Children's Church classroom, but hopefully very soon we will be able to get together right here. And until then, we'll keep giving the lessons over the videos. Well, today is about how God had chosen Moses and his brother Aaron to lead God's people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, out of Egypt into the wilderness to worship God. I'm going to be showing you some pictures along the way to give you a better idea about how this all was. As we learned last week when we heard Miss Lori, and the week before when we heard Miss Tracy tell us about how God had spoken to Moses through the burning bush. Let me show you that picture right now. Here's a picture of what it must have looked like. Moses seeing the burning bush and God speaking to him out of this flaming green bush. When he spoke to him through that burning bush, he sent Moses and his brother Aaron to tell Pharaoh to let the people go out of his land of Egypt, where they were slaves. And I have a picture of what that must have looked like. Here they are. They're having to make these bricks with their hands, and these Egyptians are standing over them the whole time with their whips and being very cruel to the Hebrew people. So God told Moses ahead of time that Pharaoh's heart was going to be hardened when he went to talk to him, and that he would not want to listen. Pharaoh was a very, very stubborn man. So Moses went to Pharaoh and he said, "The Lord God sent me to you to say, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. Let my people go," said Moses. But Pharaoh said, "No." Then God helped Moses try to convince Pharaoh by turning Moses' shepherd's staff, his rod, his shepherd's staff, like this, into a snake. Remember, Miss Lori talked about that last time, and here's a picture of what that might have looked like. Here's Pharaoh on his throne, and that shepherd's staff had turned to the snake. But Pharaoh didn't believe in God. He decided that his magicians could do that trick too. So once again, Moses and Aaron stood before Pharaoh again. And this time they said, "Because you won't listen, God has told us that this rod, this staff, will be dipped into the water of the river Nile, and the water of the river Nile will turn into blood. Well, Pharaoh really didn't believe it would happen. But when Aaron struck the water as Moses had told him to do, he touched the water and it turned into blood. Wherever there was water, it turned into blood. Even in the rivers, the lakes, the streams, all the fish in the water died and the water smelled so badly. But Pharaoh was stubborn. His heart was hardened. Pharaoh didn't believe in God. He didn't believe God did this. He called some of his magicians, and they did some tricks too. So Pharaoh just went on back to his palace. He was not impressed. In the meantime, there was no water in the river Nile. And so the Egyptians went to work right away and dug water wells along the riverbank so that they would have drinking water while all of this was going on. A little while later, God said to Moses, "Moses, go back to Pharaoh. Tell him God says to let my people go so they can worship me. Tell Pharaoh also," God said, "that if he doesn't listen, I will send frogs all over his land." But Pharaoh refused to listen and did not let the people go. So then Aaron pointed the shepherd's staff once again toward the river. This time, the land was covered with frogs. Frogs were everywhere, even in the rooms of the houses. And here's a picture of what that might have looked like. See the frogs up on their table and all around their feet. Tons of frogs. Slimy, croaking frogs were everywhere that people tried to walk. There were frogs jumping around, all around in their way. And once again, Pharaoh called his magicians, and they made frogs come up on the ground, but not as many. But Pharaoh didn't like having these frogs everywhere, and his people were unhappy about it too. And so he called for Moses and Aaron to come and listen, and said to them, this is Pharaoh talking to Moses. He said, "Ask your God to get rid of these frogs, and I will let your people go." Moses said, "All right, I'll pray and ask God to get rid of the frogs, except in the river, and then you will know it is God who is doing these miracles." Moses and Aaron went and asked God to take away the frogs, and God did. Soon there were piles of dead frogs everywhere. Ugh. When Pharaoh saw that the frogs were dead, he did not let the people go. God said to Moses, "Tell Aaron to take the shepherd's staff and strike it on the dust of the ground. and the dust of the ground will become lice and little gnats throughout the land of Egypt. And it happened like God had said. And soon lice and gnats came swarming in out of the sky. They came swarming in and they covered everything. They came and covered the people and even the animals. These lice and gnats, they bit them on their skin and it made them itch. And this time the magicians couldn't make lice and gnats appear. But it didn't matter. Pharaoh still would not let the people leave to go and worship God. Even when the magicians, they also started asking and begging Pharaoh to let the Hebrew people go. Next, the Lord told Moses, in the morning, meet Pharaoh at the river. Tell him I'm going to send flies to cover everybody and everything if he will not let my people go. So Moses told Pharaoh what God had said. And the next day, there were swarms of flies this time. Flies in the palace and in every home in Egypt. But there were no flies anywhere that the Israelites, the Hebrew people, God's people, lived. There were no flies there at all. So after this swarm of flies was covering everyone, Pharaoh was beginning to think he better listen. He quickly called for Moses and Aaron to come. Pharaoh said to them, all right, go sacrifice to your God, go worship your God, but do it here in this land. Moses said, no, the Egyptians would kill us if they saw us worship our God. We must go for 3 days to worship our God there in the wilderness. Pharaoh said, all right, go ahead, as he was busy swatting at the flies that were all over him. But don't go too far away, he said. Moses said, I will ask God to take the flies away, but don't change your mind again, Pharaoh. But when the flies disappeared, once again, Pharaoh would not let the people go. Pharaoh was a very stubborn man. His heart was hard. He actually saw, Pharaoh did, he saw God's great power, but he refused to obey. But God kept giving Pharaoh chances to do the right thing, to let the people of God be free to go and worship God. And all along, God helps and protects his people. Next week, we will learn about more of their journey and how God delivers his people and how much God cares for us. He cares for us, all of us. Thank you for being a part of Children's Church here at Monthalia. And hopefully we can meet right here together again very soon. And I hope you enjoy this song where we get to sing together along with them about Moses telling Pharaoh to let his people go.